Madam President, 50 years ago today, President Lyndon Johnson challenged a joint session of Congress and the American people to begin a war on poverty. Unfortunately, President Johnson said many Americans today live on the outskirts of hope. Our task, he said, is to help replace their despair with opportunity. Since President Johnson first issued that call, Congress and our nation have taken important steps to build and sustain a circle of protection around the most vulnerable in our society. That protection isn't as complete or as strong as it can and should be, but through programs like unemployment insurance, which we are considering this week in this Congress, we are more able to catch our neighbors when they fall and support them as they work to get back to their feet. Earlier this week, this Senate began debate on whether to extend emergency unemployment insurance for the 3,600 Delawareans and more than 1 million American job seekers whose benefits just expired. It is absolutely critical that we approve this extension. During this fragile but sustained economic recovery, unemployment insurance has been a critical lifeline, one that has prevented millions of unemployed Americans from slipping further from falling into poverty. In 2012, unemployment insurance kept 2.5 million Americans, including 600,000 children, out of poverty. That means without federal action to extend unemployment insurance, the nation's poverty rate would have been double what it was. And these numbers are for 2012, not the height of the recession. So let's be clear about what we're debating when we discuss an unemployment insurance extension. These are long-term benefits for jobless Americans who've been out of work through no fault of their own for more than 26 weeks. And when I say through no fault of their own, I mean it. You can't get benefits if you're fired for cause. And as you receive unemployment insurance benefits, you must diligently search for another job. So when we talk about the millions of long-term unemployed Americans, we're talking about folks who were laid off because of the recession, are fighting to get back on their feet, and rely on those benefits to keep their families afloat, to keep a roof over their head, food on the table, their families together, and sustain them as they continue looking for work. Yet 2 weeks ago, funding for long-term emergency unemployment insurance benefits ran out. That meant $300 less in weekly income for the average job seeker, and that meant $400 million left our economy in just the first week. In Delaware, it pulled $870,000 out of our economy. That's money that otherwise would be spent in local grocery stores and our markets. Now, one of the most vexing things I've heard in the debate over whether to continue these benefits is that they somehow incentivize people to not bother looking for jobs, to not be serious about their job search, that they instead lull able-bodied Americans into lives of dependency and despondency. Madam President, given the people I hear from, the people I meet with, the people I know in Delaware, that's not just absurd, it's, forgive me, offensive. And as President Obama said yesterday, it sells the American people short. I've met a lot of people in my years of public service. I've heard from and spoken with Delawareans up and down my state who are relying on unemployment benefits that they paid into when employed. And every one of them would trade a job for relying on unemployment insurance in a heartbeat. Let me share with you a few stories of Delawareans who've contacted me and who've shared just how hard this has been for them. Debbie from Middletown, Delaware, wrote to me that while she's been receiving unemployment benefits, she's applied to 156 jobs. She's been interviewed 3 times. She's 56. She has worked diligently since she was a teenager. She's worked hard. She's paid her taxes. She's paid into this unemployment insurance system practically her whole life. And yet now, when she needs it most, we failed to continue to provide this lifeline of support. Linda from Newark wrote to me that on just $258 a week, her family has barely been able to stay afloat. They're doing everything they can to keep up on their bills to stay current. But even with unemployment insurance, they've had to sell some of their family's treasured possessions and goods. She wrote to me, "This is no way for anyone to live. It's disheartening and it's difficult to stay motivated and to keep searching for work." And frankly, she said, "I'm thoroughly fed up with being categorized as someone who lives off the government by collecting unemployment benefits. Well, I agree with her, because frankly, Linda, you paid into these benefits for years. This is what it's there for. John from Frederica told me that he was laid off from the Dover Air Force Base, in part because of the sequester, and now depends on unemployment benefits while he continues diligently searching for another job. This is a man who is a Navy veteran, was willing to make the ultimate sacrifice for our country. And yet right now, because of the partisan gridlock in this Congress, we're not there for him and his family. Madam President, the millions of Americans, like Debbie, Linda, and John in Delaware, face a really tough job market. Nationally, for every available job, there are 3 job seekers. And the longer someone remains unemployed, the harder it becomes for them to find work. The more their skills are out of date, the more difficult the search becomes, and the more they need our support to sustain that job search. I've seen these effects up close and personally in Delaware. In my 3 years as a senator, I've hosted 16 different job fairs to connect Delawareans looking for work with employers looking to hire. And I've been honored to partner with Senator Carper and Congressman Carney in hosting these job fairs. In fact, we're hosting another one in our state capital, Dover, in just a few weeks. When you listen to unemployed Delawareans and listen to them talk about their struggle, about how hard it is to make ends meet and to keep searching for a job, you get a sense of how important these benefits are for their survival, for their families. And you get a sense of how much more we can and should be doing to tackle and deal with long-term unemployment in America. As poverty of opportunity and hope afflicts too many of our communities and darkens the lives of too many of our neighbors, let us not suffer in this chamber from a poverty of imagination, determination, and ambition. On this issue, which is so fundamental to who we are as a nation and to our service in this body, we cannot give in to complacency and apathy. Fighting poverty is hard, and adapting our economy to the realities of the new era is a challenge we've struggled with for more than a generation. Yet figuring out how to revitalize an economy whose growth is strong and equitable, one that's dynamic and creative and competitive, but also has a broad middle class, provides security for working families and leaves no one behind, an economy that invests in the dreams and aspirations of every child. Building that economy is surely one of the most urgent and difficult challenges we here face. And doing so requires that we put aside our personal politics and come together in areas where until recently there's been a broad and bipartisan consensus. I now hear some of my Republican colleagues talk on this floor about the war on poverty 50 years later as having been an abject failure. They make sweeping indictments on government action, putting small government ideology ahead of the shared national goal of fighting poverty. But this perspective misses the point. The original war on poverty was made up of a lot of programs, energetic initiatives that worked at every level of government, some that failed, but many others that through steady and determined bipartisan work and steady improvement and refinement over the years have become critical, central, widely valued strands that hold together our social safety net. Medicare, Medicaid, Head Start, food stamps, unemployment insurance, all of these programs are valued and hold American families together and sustain American job seekers. Bipartisan leaders across the decades have reaffirmed the importance and value of these programs time and time again. And these programs, let's remember, are about so much more than lifting people out of poverty. They're also about keeping people out of poverty in the first place. We need them to build and strengthen and sustain the American middle class, which is one of the greatest legacies of this nation. So, as we search for ways to adapt our fight to new times and new challenges, we must remember there is no one way to win the war on poverty President Johnson first declared 50 years ago. It's not a question of big or small government, of federal or local action. As President Johnson himself said, this will not be a short or easy struggle. No single weapon or strategy will suffice. Poverty, he said, is a national problem. But this attack, to be effective, must be organized at the state and local level. For the war on poverty, he said, will not be won in Washington. It must be won in the field, in every private home, in every public office, from the courthouse to the White House. This wasn't an ideological call for big centralized government control. It was an all-hands-on-deck call, a moral call for our nation to meet a national challenge. And although we've made progress since he first addressed this Congress in 1964, his call to combat poverty remains just as important today, even as our challenges have evolved. We've come a long way since the depths of our own Great Recession just a few years ago. More than 8 million private sector jobs have been created. There's been a more than 3-point drop in the national unemployment rate. We have resurgent energy, housing, and manufacturing sectors. Yet, although a few years have passed since our economy sunk to its lowest lows, this crisis remains for those Americans and their families who are still struggling to find a job, feed their families, and keep a roof over their heads. This week, while we're debating extending emergency unemployment insurance, we should note this is not only an obvious and necessary thing to do, it is the beginning of our real work of sustaining the war on poverty. I am proud to be engaged in bipartisan efforts to strengthen the middle class, to focus on jobs and skills and manufacturing. We have to find bipartisan solutions that engage the private and public sectors, federal and local governments, in putting our people back to work. And while we do that, we cannot forget to continue to insist on a circle of protection around the most vulnerable in our society, rather than allowing that valued circle to crumble. We have to remember that we're all in this together, that there, for the grace of God, go I, as we see those in our community, in our families, who are struggling in this recovery. We know that although today it may be our neighbors, tomorrow it may be us. President Johnson called on us to focus on the best of America, the spirit that we hold each other up, the spirit that builds community through mutual sacrifice. And as we begin our work in this new year to jumpstart our economy and spread hope and opportunity, we must never forget that basic spirit which President Johnson called forward and which has kept this country moving from generation to generation.